Hello and welcome to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. Reasons for optimism or more uncertainty and violence. With the end of the Gaddafi regime, what are the possible futures of Libya? Can the country move from civil war to a stable and democratic society? Or will it follow down the path of another Afghanistan or Iraq? To Crosstalk Libya after Gaddafi, I'm joined by Lindsay German in London. She is a national conveyor of Stop the War Coalition. In Denver, we cross to Daniel Wagner. He is CEO of Country Risk Solutions. And in Toronto, we go to Eric Margolis. He is an award-winning journalist and author of War at the Top of the World, The Struggle for Afghanistan and Asia. All right, folks, this is Crosstalk. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. But first, let's look at some of the challenges facing the new Libya.
Following 6 months of a rocky battle that gripped the world's attention, the Arab Spring has produced another significant outcome. The toppling of Libya's Gaddafi may have come as a surprise to almost everyone, not the least of which were the rebels who fought the 42-year regime. But as the victory fanfare settles, Libyans are facing a far more trying challenge, that of proving they can create an alternative to Gaddafi's rule.
We understand that we're lacking a lot of institutions, we're lacking a lot of civil societies, so we are starting from almost 0 point in this situation.
The country's Transitional Council has been lobbying foreign governments to unfreeze billions of dollars in Gaddafi's assets to jumpstart the country's economy. And the international community has afforded Libya the benefit of the doubt.
While there will be huge challenges ahead, one of the positive aspects here is that the Libyans are the ones who are undertaking the regime change and the ones leading the transition.
There's no sign, however, that NATO, which sustained the campaign against Gaddafi forces, will be folding up its operations anytime soon.
The mission will continue in full compliance with the United Nations mandate for as long as it's needed, but not a day longer.
The transitional leadership has so far rebuffed the idea of deploying UN military observers, but did ask that the UN help ensure democratic elections. But the fear remains that NATO presence, money, and diplomatic support notwithstanding, political infighting and tribal strife could threaten the country's further prospects. Masha Charney for Crosstalk, RT.
Okay, if I can go to Daniel in Denver, I always go to the person who had to get up earliest for this program. We just heard in that report, the Libyans don't have a lot of, let's say, material to work with to start building a new society. How optimistic are you that the civil strife will come to an end? Because, as we're all reminded, it's still very much a tribal society. Gaddafi wanted to keep it that way, conquer and divide. What do Libyans have in common, except for maybe the vast majority of them are very happy that Gaddafi is gone?
Well, they certainly have their language in common. They have their history in common. I think the challenge is going to be, and we've seen this already, that along tribal and religious and provincial lines, there are divides, deep divides in Libyan society. And one of the concerns that I have is that it's unclear exactly who is leading the charge here, exactly what the composition of the new council will be, how long the transitional government will be in power, and what it will ultimately look like. It's really nice to have a change of government after 42 years. The real challenge is what comes next, and I don't really think that anybody knows the answer.
Lindsay, if I go to you in London, one of the things that NATO powers are keeping in mind as they met in Paris is that they realized that they didn't have a follow-up plan after their invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. Do you think that the NATO allies have thought that far ahead in this case? Is that, okay, they have military control of the country, or they have surrogates there now. Do they know what to do next? And can they help build a nation?
Well, no, I don't think they can. NATO is a military operation. It's a military organisation. The British and French in particular have played a very big role in initiating this intervention and in backing it up. The fact that at the Libya conference, the conference is chaired by France's President Sarkozy and our Prime Minister here in Britain, David Cameron, tells you exactly how much the West are intervening here, but they don't have any clear plan. They don't. Many of the people they're now backing are people who were in Gaddafi's government or worked for Gaddafi only a few months ago. So what they wanted to do was regime change, but as we've seen with Afghanistan and Iraq, they are absolutely no good at nation building, and nor can they be, because it isn't their nation.
Eric, if I can go to you in Toronto, over the last few months we've seen a lot of infighting within the rebel camp, especially one of its commanders was mysteriously murdered. Do you think that the NATO allies really know who they're dealing with here? Are these people that can be trusted? Because there's a lot of doubts about their backgrounds, just as we heard, a lot of them used to work for Gaddafi himself, and there's the element of the Islam element and its connections to terror networks.
Peter, NATO knows some of the members of this new transitional council because it put them in place there. French intelligence played a leading role in cobbling together the transition council and putting people with whom it or Britain's MI6 or the US CIA had a long relationship. Many of them Libyan exiles, some of them members of Gaddafi's government. So it knows them. It does not, as you brought up, know these murky nationalists and Islamists who, until recently, were regarded as, quote, terrorists, unquote. Remember, George Bush lauded Gaddafi as, again, I quote, our valuable ally in the war against terrorism. Well, he was speaking about the militants in Benghazi, who've been cultivated for a long time by the British. So they just don't know. They're hoping for the best. But you know something, as I always say, the men with the guns make the rules. And this war was not won by the Libyan people, as portrayed in the media. It was run by special forces from Britain and France and by their air forces. And I think they will have a very important say in the makeup of the future Libyan government.
Daniel, do you have any
Peter,
worries?
Could I just add something
Yeah,
there?
go right ahead. Jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to what Eric has said, and that is that my understanding is that the Qatari government was actually central to the financing of the rebel movement, and one has to ask oneself what role they may expect to play going forward. I mean, they made this investment in the rebel movement fully expecting something in return, and they're in a position to be able to utilize that influence. The question is, how will it manifest itself, and what are the expectations that NATO is going to have for their own involvement in this process?
Lindsay, well, Daniel kind of got ahead of me there. There's been a lot of investment in here into this war. A lot of people would say it was illegal. Now there's going to be payback. And are you worried about that? Because just as was mentioned, the Qatari government was heavily involved. NATO is going to make probably make defense and military decisions, security decisions on the ground. Even though they say they won't, they probably will because they made an investment in it. I mean, it doesn't just divide Libyans more than bring them together.
Well, that is one of the very big dangers. There was a tweet which went out on Twitter the other week saying people might think it took a long time to get rid of Gaddafi, but it can take even longer to get rid of NATO. And we have to remember, we have some history here. This isn't the first time we've had an intervention. It happened in Afghanistan. We were told 10 years ago that they would build a new nation. The war is at its worst now. This month that we've just had was the bloodiest war for American troops in the whole, bloodiest month for American troops in the whole of the war. We've had it in Iraq, where we were told there would be stability, democracy. Virtually no Iraqi will say to you today that they live in a stable and democratic country. And the danger is that NATO will go in there, is in there. There are troops on the ground, even though the various governments deny this. They want to send in more troops. So far, the TNC have told them that they don't want UN troops in, but this may change if there's more instability in the country. There may be more and more pressure on the Libyans to accept foreign troops. And I think a lesson we have to learn, it's a lesson we try to put very, very strongly to our government, is that you cannot bring democracy by bombing, by invasion, by foreign powers, who actually, as a matter of fact, have a very, very bad record in Libya, among other countries in Africa, for their old colonial past. You cannot possibly do it. And when you look at what the real issues here are about, they're about regime change. That's what they wanted to do, was to get rid of Gaddafi. They've got rid of Gaddafi. Now we will see the true colour of it. Already in Britain it's been announced that there was a special unit set up to deal with oil. And the oil companies, the various governments, the secret services, they will all be involved in these, trying to get their share of the action over the next few months, and it will not be for the benefit of the Libyan people.
Okay, Eric, if I could go to you.
Peter,
yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to... I just wrote recently in my columns that oil is the ultimate aphrodisiac, and oil is very big. You know, as we're hearing all this guff about humanitarian missions and protecting civilians, what's really happening is French companies have stolen a march on the Brits and the rest of Western Europe. They're in Libya now. They're trying to corner a lot of the rebuilding from damage caused by NATO bombing or by lack of infrastructure in Libya. This is a gold rush. This is a new Klondike. There's huge amounts of money. There are arms to be sold. There are roads to be built. So they're rushing in. The Qataris... interesting story. You know, I interviewed, I spent an evening with Gaddafi back in the late 1980s, and he told me, he said, you know, he said the Gulf Arabs, he said the Saudis and the Gulf Arabs, he said they're a bunch of old ladies in skirts. And if you know the Arab mentality, you know this really burned them up. Gaddafi said a number of times. And one of the reasons I think that the Qataris were very smart people, but they really wanted to get revenge, Arab style, on Gaddafi for insulting them and for insulting the Arab leaders.
All right, I'm going to have to jump in here, and we're going to go to a short break. And after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Libya's future. Stay with RT.
I got out of the military in 1966. I got out because of the things I saw, the things I was doing, and the reasons that we were given for doing them. It was a personal protest.
During the Vietnam War, an anti-war movement emerged that altered the course of history. This movement didn't take place on college campuses, but in barracks and on ships. It penetrated elite military colleges like West Point, and it spread throughout the battlefields of Vietnam. Yet today, few people know about the GI movement against the war in Vietnam.
F the Army. We always said free the Army, or fun travel and adventure, but it really meant the Army.